This week, we continued talking about inflections and started to introduce paradigms. So before that, we're going to finish up some of the concepts from last lecture, a few slides, about exponents. So exponents is about inflectional meanings and how they appear on morphs. So if we have a word that has one inflectional meaning on it, and it appears as one morph, that's called simple exponents. So in English, when we have a verb like fly, and then we change it to a verb like flies, really what we're doing is fly plus, in this case, it would be, well, third person singular. So maybe that's not the best example because there's two meanings there. But if we contrast it with a word like flew, well, now this is fly plus the past tense. So this is a case of simple exponents because there's only one marker on fly. If there is one marker that expresses multiple inflectional meanings, that's called cumulative exponents. So for example, with fly, we have agreement with third person and singular. So really there's two meanings associated with that marker. But I would rather not use English as an example and instead use the example below. So in Cherokee, verbs have highly inflected like morphology here. So the verb is give, and give has perfect on it. So actually, if we just take a look at this part with give, corresponding to this, just that part could be simple. So there's simple exponents in this part of the word. But then we have this prefix. And this is one prefix, so we can't really break this apart. But in this prefix, it expresses the fact that it's first person singular subject. There's a third person plural animate object. So it specifies 7 pieces of inflectional information in one morph. So that's why it's called cumulative exponents. You're accumulating meanings in one morpheme, or one morph. So what type of exponents do we have in English? Well, we just saw a nice example up there with flew in the past tense. So we have simple exponents. But we have cumulative exponents as well. For example, any pronoun in English is an example of cumulative exponents. So he, for example, what is in he? Well, it's third person, it is singular, it is masculine, and what else is it? It is also nominative, it is a subject. If it were accusative, like for instance him, well, it's still third person, it's still singular, it's still masculine, but now it's accusative, it's in the object position. So there's 4 pieces of information in a pronoun. So that's an example of cumulative exponents. So we have both in English. Now on the other end of the spectrum is this thing called extended exponents. So instead of having a bunch of meanings attaching to one morph, instead one morpheme, one meaning, appears in multiple different places. So for example, in English, when we have something like he walks, and we think about agreement, he has to agree with whatever is on the S in walks. So the inflectional information is actually spread over 2 parts. So that would be extended exponents in English. Both of that would be third person singular information. So if you want to use a third person singular pronoun, you have to have third person singular agreement. And here is another example from a language called Archie. So here we have some ergative singulars on the bottom. So gel li, so gel is cup, and li is our ergative marker. It is singular, but there's no singular marking on the ergative. And now if we compare it to the meaning above, what do we see? Well, we see that the li has changed to shy. It's now an ergative marker with the plural on it. So it has a new suffix. And there is also a plural marker in the word now. So adding as another suffix to cup, which of course is still in the same position. So plurality is showing up twice in 2 markers. So this is an example of extended exponents. It cannot just appear in one marker. And notice we don't have this in the original example because we have singular on cup, but it's not like we have singular on the ergative suffix as well. So the same example is expressed on the right side, but we see that there is a different plural marker. So the ergative plural marker stays the same, but there's still some variation with whatever plural marker is being used between the root and that ergative suffix. Now, let's practice this. So we have to see if there's any examples of cumulative or extended exponents in this data set. And this is a bit rough to look at, but let's take a look at the original form. So let's assume that clax here, clach, is the nominative singular, is the base form. Now, what do I notice compared to the plural? Well, they're all the same, and they all take this an suffix, and they're missing this h here. So what can we conclude from what we're looking at? Well, what I know for sure is that the plural takes an an suffix, and the roots for the plural would just be like klach. Now, what is the singular doing? Well, in the singular, we have, well, in the nominative singular, we have an h being added, so it's like the root is instead klach, so it's probably an aspirated k. Or maybe it is a k and an actual h. I don't know the language. So there's probably something to do with the roots being altered. But either way, this h is going to be a sign of singularity because it's in the singular but not the plural. Now, what else is happening? Well, in the genitive singular, we see a vowel change, we see a consonant change, and then we see an added e. So let's think of these as like 4 separate processes. We have the h, we have a vowel change, so a going to o, we have a consonant change to the fricative version of it, and then we have plus a vowel. So are we going to see cumulative exponents in here? And we can reason this out. We don't have to know which pieces are doing which, which morphs in here correspond to which meanings. But we do know that the h signals the singular form. Now, what do we know about the vowel change? Well, the vowel change is happening in the genitive and the dative. So this could be a marker for the genitive or the dative. What is the x to c doing here, the consonant change? Well, that's doing the same thing. The consonant is changing in the genitive or the dative case, and specifically in the singular genitive dative case. And when are we adding e to it? Just in the genitive singular. So here's what we know. There have to be at least 2 things in here that correspond to the genitive or the dative. So that means that there's multiple processes expressing the same inflection. We just don't know exactly which ones, but we can say that the consonant change and the vowel change have to express some genitive dative singularity. So there's multiple inflections, there's like one meaning being spread across 2 different processes. So that is our example of that is our example of extended exponents. So with extended exponents, we do see that the genitive and the dative might be split over multiple different processes. But we also see that there are processes that express more than one meaning. So for example, this whole unit here, OCE and OC, express singular and genitivity, singularity and the dativeness. So these are both examples of cumulative and extended exponents, because we don't really know how these work, but we know that one morpheme has to be spread out to multiple morphs, and we know that one morph can also have multiple meanings here. So this was a complicated data set, especially to start, because we're looking at root alternations in a lot of processes. So as we go through, we're going to see some more simple examples, and maybe coming back to this after will help out. So let's talk about paradigms. And we have to talk about different relations first so we understand what we mean by paradigm. So there's 2 types of relations. There's syntagmatic relations. You can think of this as coming from the word syntax. So this talks about the order of units. So for example, in a sentence, we know that we can't put the subject and object right beside each other. Like we can't say he pudding, but we can say he likes pudding. So The relations between the words is a syntagmatic relation. A paradigmatic relation talks about all of the different forms of a word that can fit in a slot. So for example, any nominative pronoun can fit in this subject slot. So we have a paradigm for nominative pronouns. He, she, they, I, so on. That depends on the person, maybe the gender, and definitely the number. Same with likes or like. We have different forms. It could even be is liking, which would be a progressive form. It could be a had liked, which would be a perfect form. So we have these different forms we can use that are dependent on inflections. So that's a paradigmatic relationship between these verb forms. So when we talk about these paradigms, we'll be taking a look at how the different inflections contribute to form some morpheme. So we can take morphology and analyze it through a syntagmatic lens or a paradigmatic lens. And some morphologists will fight over talking about morphology with just one of these, although that was mostly historically. Now we know that there's two approaches, so we have some evidence for this. We know there's some syntagmatic, some relationship in terms of order because of how affixes attach. We know if we have a root, we can attach affixes to it, and depending on the language, there are certain ways they have to attach. So for instance, in English, we can put X at the front and ing at the end, but we cannot put ing at the front and X at the end. So this is explained in terms of order, which is syntagmatic. Now, paradigmatic evidence for that comes from inflectional classes. So for example, we know how to set up a conjugation table if you've taken any language course, but you've probably seen one at some point in your life. So for example, if you were to think about nouns with singular and plural, you might say like, you have a sack and then you have sacks. So the plural, singular, this is like a very, very small paradigm that tells us what we do. So you attach S to plural nouns. So because we have inflectional classes, some of these paradigms, we know that there's some paradigmatic thing going on in morphology. So we're going to take a look at suppletive morphology, suppletive inflections, specifically declensions. So declensions are like inflections, but for nouns. So singular, nominative, accusative, and so on. It is an inflection. So declension is just a term. That's it. It's a specific type of inflection. So in Latin, there are two types of classes for nouns. You either get an O declension or a U declension. So depending on whether something is singular or whether something is plural, and then the individual case, you will get different endings. So for example, if you want to use this word hort, and you want to use the singular dative, you would say hort O, the long O. If you had a word like grad and wanted to say the dative singular, well, that's a U declension, so you say grad, we, or however that's pronounced. So depending on the verb you have to do different conjugations. And when we take a look at this, we'll notice that there are some patterns in between them, but not a lot. So for example, the nominative accusative singulars are the same for both declensions. What's another one? For the plural nominative accusative in the U declension, they're the same, but in the O declension, these are actually different. So they have different patterns. So here's just a question. If you're a language learner and you're given a word like aptus and you want to start using it in a sentence, could you know what declension it is just from hearing aptus? And of course the answer is no. You don't know which paradigm it is, because all you'd know is that's a singular nominative form. You'd have to hear another form to figure it out. So the accusative singular won't work, but any of these should help you know what declension it would be. So I want to revise our lexical entries just to include inflectional information in a way that's a little bit easier to read. So what we've done before with our lexical entries is done stuff like and then maybe we put some information here. So this is singular, nominative, accusative, or masculine, or something like that. But instead of doing that, what we're going to do is put them in a list in the box. So each type of inflection gets a line and then that variant of it. So for person, You could write singular or plural for case, nominative, accusative, genitive, and so on. So these are examples of the pronouns he and she if we were really bad at analyzing things. So I wanted to show off an example just to show the inflections without just really pointing out something that we're familiar with. So imagine we think that he is like a base form. We know he is a singular nominative masculine pronoun. In fact, we could put number in here too. If we're being complete, we probably should. Number 3. So that's he. And let's pretend that she is formed just by taking he and then adding an s. Let's just have fun with it. Pretend we're naive linguists. Okay, so what's the difference between he and she? Well, it's just the gender. And we can see the differences here. We also know that the person and case are the same by looking at this lexical entry. We're also not guaranteed that we know how to break up any of our roots here, our lexemes, our words. So by putting it in a list here, we're basically saying this whole form has these cases. We're not worried about which suffix or which affix is giving it case or giving it person, at least in these word forms. But then again, in the word-based model, it never really has been about breaking down morphemes. So I want you to practice drawing a table for a couple of these. So I've done hortus and hortum here. So hortus, we use x for the root because it's the same in every case. So x us is nominative, singular. And if I wanted to write o declension there so that way I could keep track and know, I might do that. Xum for hortum is the same thing, but now it's accusative instead of nominative. And I might also write the o declension. So I'm going to do one more for you, just as an example, and feel free to do as many as you like until you're comfortable with this notation. So grad So grad is the root in all of these cases, so we can keep that the same. What we do is we add This is a noun. This has some meaning associated with it. What is the case for it's genitive, so I'll write gen. And what is the number, which I'll abbreviate as num? Well, that's plural, so I can write plural here. And this would be our lexical entry for grad So same information as before, we're just adding in those 2 inflectional lines. And then when we have a whole set of these, what we can do is we can put them all in like a set bracket, all in a set with these curly brackets. And that will basically say this is a class, this is a group that all behave together. So all of the O's are in a set and all of the U's are in a set. Now, I showed you a couple similarities before, but I want to think about more general similarities. So, for example, in the plural genitive, we have orum and so orum and and there is a similarity there. The genitive both have as part of that suffix, but one has or and one has u before it. But there is still some similarity there. So maybe they came from some sort of inflectional paradigm that eventually was split and things changed over time. What's another similarity? Every declension begins with a vowel. So either O, U, I, or short or long. So every single inflection ends or starts with a vowel. And finally, here's another one, another interesting one. The singular, genitive, dative, and ablative all use long vowels, while the singular, nominative, and accusative use short vowels. So there are some similarities there as well. So we know there's similarities. How are we going to capture them? Well, the first thing we can do is we can turn everything into a root form. So we're going to get rid of the roots and just make the suffixes apparent to us. So that is what I've done here. So it used to be something like hortus and gradus. And what I've done is I've taken those roots and turned them into x's. So we can see the suffixes more clearly. Now, if you take a look at patterns, we know that x, us, the nominative singular for both declensions is the same. So we could generalize this and say there's a pattern where it's x, the root, and then it takes us. And that is how you form the singular. Specifically the singular nominative. Let's be more specific there. What if we take a look at the singular ablative, like xo and xu in this row? Well, in this case, they don't have a specific vowel in common, but they do have a vowel in common. And in fact, I don't have the long vowel markers in here, but these should be long vowels, so we can be even more specific and say the generalization is that it's the root followed by a long vowel. So maybe that's where it came from. And finally, if we take a look at the plural accusative, I shouldn't say finally because these aren't all the examples, these are just the ones I want to point out. These have similarities in that they add a vowel, either O or U, we don't know which one, but then there's an S after. So we can do this hybrid rule where we use variables and the letters themselves. So just like we've done before, but now we're generalizing. So here's a question. How could you find a generalization for this one? And remember what I said about similarities, right? So the UM is the same in both. So maybe we want to say this is X. It's followed by something else, whatever Y is, and then it has at the end. So maybe that's the generalization. Or maybe there's another way to do it. So let me just write this out here. For so that's the root, and then If we take a look at it like this, maybe we can see another pattern. So there's an X, a vowel. It's either R or nothing. It's something. So there's some variation there. So maybe we put a variable like Z in there. And then Z is either replaced with R or with nothing over time. And then U and M are the same. So actually, if we want to generalize, this is a really good generalization here because it leaves room for possible deletion. And it also captures the fact that there is a vowel immediately after the root. So that could be how we generalize that. And what we'll find is that the more common two forms have, the more in common two forms have, the less abstract it looks. While the more different two things are, the more abstract it looks, because you can end up with rules that are like, what's similar? It's just X, Y, Z. Like, what is X, Y, Z? It's just variables, because they can be totally different. So here's the hierarchy for Latin. And basically what I've done at this point is I have taken each of these pairs. So to read this, this is singular and plural, and then the cases are on the side. So nominative, accusative, genitive, and so on. And I've taken the accusative in the top left, sorry, the nominative singular in the top left for the O declension and the U declension. And we've generalized them in an abstract hierarchy. So this is an inheritance hierarchy. This is basically telling us how these evolved over time, what the similarities are. So we can see that the singular nominative and singular accusative are pretty set. It's a root and then us and But when we take a look at similarities between, say, the singular genitives, well, we have root and then I, so that's a singular genitive there. Then the other one is X, U, S. So how do you generalize this? Well, the root is in common, there's some vowel, and then either there's going to be a consonant there or not. So there's something there that could be deleted, so we just use a variable. So what's similar between XI and XUS? Well, there's the root, there's the vowel, and then nothing else is common after. So this is much more abstract because there have been more changes over time. And the further you go up in a hierarchy, if there's way more classes, they become much more abstract. So the other thing I want to point out is this case. So the fact that you went from XIS to XIBUS, this is something that comes from the textbook. So sometimes when you add in sort of like a suffix, or in this case it would be a suffix like ib, they just don't put a variable there. However, it would be totally fine to look at it as something like, okay, we have XIS in one case, we have XI, BUS in another case. So what we could do is we could say this is like X, Y, and S. Or I guess more specifically, we could say this is XI, there's some consonant, and then there's something afterwards. So there's a few different ways that we could write this. But we do know that both of them have an I and an S in them, so that is present there. Okay, so here is an example of a generalization, and we're basically just doing it for each parent going up. Now, when things get really complicated, and this is in the textbook, you can have, like, say, 7 declension classes. And you can create a hierarchy for all of these that are multiple levels deep. So what we're going to do, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the declension classes for the A, E, and U. And then we'll create an inheritance hierarchy for it. And we'll try to do this in the screen with whatever limited capacity I have here. So we'll copy paste that. We'll put a new page in. And let's see how we can do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a paradigm for this. So for A, I'm going to do X, A, X, A. So hold on, I know the roots. It's going to be E, Mare, Texan, and Mime. We're not dealing with I2. So if I just go through, how do I want to do this? Let me set this up. So I'm going to split it down the middle. So we're going to end up with a box with a 3x2 here. So for the A declension, and I'm not going to really label it here, we're going to do XA, XA, XAS for the third one there. Then we have XES, XES, and XON. Okay, so actually I'll just label this as A. For the I1 declension, we have XE, XE, XES, XACE, XACE, and XON. So again, if you didn't know where I got that, I was basically just going through this list here. And now I'm going to go through this final list for the U declension. So here we have XU, XU, XUS, XUs. Well, these are a little bit different. We seem to be adding something here. Okay, so we have 3 paradigms. And for this exercise, we're going to say that they all came from the same like box. So it's like a one inheritance hierarchy where there's a top box and it branches to 3 of these declensions to keep it simple. But I'll show you an alternative analysis where it doesn't do that. Okay, so we have these 3 boxes and now our job is to generalize. So straight away, I'm going to get rid of the data and just do a new page because the data is going to be distracting. I already have the information that I want. Okay, so let's put this down at the bottom here because we are going to create a general box for these, and it's going to branch off to the other 3. So we need to find something in common. So when I take a look at all of our singular nominatives, XA, XE, and XU, what's in common? Well, it's all the root followed by a vowel. In fact, the second one is the same thing, the same form. So you can think of XV as the next one. Now, what about this one? The root AS, the root IS, and the root US. Well, it's all the root, it's always a vowel, and then it always was followed by S. So we could do X, V for the vowel, and then S after. Now for this next step, we see XES, XES, and XU, ES. So I'm going to do it the way that we did it before, the way I showed it, not how the book showed it. And let's write these words in a certain sequence so we can see the pattern. So if we write it like this, what is our generalization? Well, the root is the same, the ES is the same, and then there's a couple sounds in the middle that could be deleted. So I'm going to put this as a Z, you can put it as a Y. That corresponds to these 2. So an abstract approach here could be X, Z, E, S. It's going to be the same thing for the 5th entry as well. And with the last one, instead of ES, it's on, with the same th in between. So this would be XZ, ON. So this is generalizing all of them together. But when we look at this, we notice that 2 of these are more similar to each other than the others. And that is these 2. So it would make more sense if these 2 declensions derived from some abstract one, and this declension over to the right maybe came in earlier. So we can almost think of it as like at some point in the past, maybe these were just one declension, the 2 on the left, and this was another one on the right. And then the 2 on the left split off. So I want to show you what that analysis would look like. Okay, and I'm going to do it on this screen. So you can always go back to the video if you want to see that again. Let me get rid of the similarities. So let's create a box. And I'll make it a little bit smaller here so we have room. That covers just those two. And if we go through, we find some very similar patterns. So XV, XV, XVS. But when we get over to the right side, we don't have this weird XZES, this weird abstract C in the middle anymore. It's very clear that they're the same thing, XES, XES, and XON. So this is very similar, right? It would make sense that this abstract paradigm evolved into these more concrete ones. Now we can get more abstract and say, well, maybe originally these two came together at some point. And this is where we can say, okay, so now we have the XV, the XV, the XVS, and we get something more abstract now. So what are the similarities between these two, the root ace and the root oothes? Well, it's just Z, there's some variable that's putting ooth in there. That's what's different, but you still have ace at the end. So this is another way we can analyze this that is a little bit better, because what's happening now is we start with something really abstract. We have a guess of where all of these declensions originated, and we're making some guesses based on similarity, how they evolved over time. So it's almost like we're saying first there was a more major split, and then there was a more minor split after that determined the specific vowels. So that's a way of looking at it. And there's going to be other ways that you can do other analyses. So maybe you put these two together first and the other one after, although that might not look so good. And we won't talk about how we can solve that, but this is how we can create an inheritance hierarchy. Now we just did all of this stuff with affixes, but the words themselves, the roots, the lexemes, can have alternation too. So the paradigm doesn't have to be on like a pronoun or a tense-like thing. It can just be on the word, like stay. So for example, in Persian, we can have any word, any verb that has like 4 letters. It's like a CVCC word in the past tense. And when you go to the present tense, what's going to happen all the time is that final consonant is going to get deleted. So whatever that C2 is, I just put a 2 there to signal that it's different. That gets deleted. So this is a systematic form of the verb. So it's a paradigm. Like that's how present tense appears. That's how past tense appears. So we won't see any examples of that further, but that was there. Now, the last part we're going to talk about is syncretism. So let's say we have a paradigm and we find that multiple forms are similar. So for example, the forms to be in English. I am, I was. So this is different than you are and you were. Now what we notice is in the past, we have 2 different forms. We have was, which appears on the I and he or she, and we have were that appears on the rest. So you singular and then all the plurals. So really we can be very specific with was, and we can say this is specifically a first person and third person singular form, while the other ones are plural and then second person singular. What about the present forms? MR is RRR. Okay, well, we see a very similar pattern with the plural forms, but well, what's happening here? Now M and is are getting different forms. So the question we're asking with syncretism is this fact that are and were are consistent for you singular, you plural, and the other plurals, is this a coincidence? Are these just homonyms? Or have they actually syncretized? Have they become synonymous in meaning over time? So how could we test that? That is the question. We can ask ourselves if it follows any other inflectional pattern in English. So actually what's nice is we saw there were patterns between how both of these acted, but we can take a look at other paradigms too. So maybe we want to take a look at verb forms. So let's take a word like walk. So we can say I walk, you walk, he, she walks. Oh, that's different. Then the rest are walk. So if we take a look at this one, when we still think about this exceptional case, the he and she is exceptional with verbs as well. So the fact that we have something exceptional here tells us that, hey, that is exceptional. But the fact, and this is important, the fact that we have the same form appearing in all of these plurals and the singular you indicates that, hey, this is actually a systematic change, because other things are appearing the same way. The plural form with you and the plural form of the singular are, the same form, not just for be, but for all verbs. We might also test some coordination, some grammaticality. So in English, it's like, I or you play. He or she plays. But you can't say he or we plays, right? He or we plays, that's weird. So I want to show this in German, just so we can get an idea of sort of this, how this works in a different language. So here is the German system for pronouns with singulars and plurals. So what you'll notice is that the second singular and the second, sorry, not the second singular, the first plural and the third plural look the same. Additionally, the third person singular and the second person plural look the same. Now, when we think about second person singular and third person singular and second person plural, we might think, well, what is in common with these two? Like, there's no reason why these would be the same. So maybe they're just homonyms. Maybe it's like the same pronunciation, but it's a different word category, or maybe it's the same pronunciation, but it doesn't agree, so it comes out ungrammatical. So if these are two different words, and they just happen to sound the same, then we can use coordination to test grammaticality. Because here's how this works. Let's think about this in English. He and you, so third person singular he, second person plural you, which verb of the word walk would you use? Would you say walk or walks? He and you, you'd use walk. Now, what is walk? Well, walk is not third person singular. Okay, that's good. And when you take a look at he and you, this is, well, he is third person singular, you might be second person plural here, but together this forms a plural. So the plural takes walk, which is what all the plural forms take. If I say he and you walks, this is ungrammatical. And this is ungrammatical because S needs a singular, so it can't agree with you. So that's how we know that the inflections that he and you both take when they have a verb with them are different. So to show this in German, let's take a look at an example. Either Balek or Close will play, and we use spielt. So this is a singular, and what is spielt? This is either going to be a third person singular or a second person plural. So that would be fine. We have agreement there. Second sentence, either I or you singular will play in the game, spiel or spielst. Now this doesn't work. Spiel doesn't work because spiel requires a first person singular subject. Spiels doesn't work because it requires a second person singular subject. But together, I or you, this is no longer just a first or second person singular subject. This is something else. So that's why neither of these work. It is ungrammatical. Now let's compare it to the C. Either we or they will play, and this is spielen. So this is either going to be first person plural or it's third person plural mark. So when we think about we or they, well, we is a first person plural, they is third person plural. So if these actually take different forms of the verb, this should be ungrammatical. This will only be grammatical if spielen works for both they and we together. And because it is grammatical, because it works, we know that these have been syncretized. These are not accidentally the same, like sounding the same. These actually have the same meanings because they work with agreement. So we can compare B and C directly. You had I on its own and you on its own, and you can't use the verb form for I or you in that position. In this case, we have we and they, and we can use that form for agreement here because we is the first person plural, they is the third person plural. Both of those take those forms and they mean the same thing. Okay, so this test is hard to do on your own. So you probably won't ever have to do it unless you're doing research in the language or know it pretty well. The last one, natural class. So can you describe a group of inflections as appearing with that form and nothing else appearing as that form? So what I mean here is with you in English, whether it's the singular or the plural, the form is exactly the same. These rows are the same. You, your, for nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive. So actually, the second person forms a natural class. It doesn't matter whether it's singular or plural. The second person behaves the same way. We can also see another natural class here with the accusative and dative. So whether it's accusative or dative, you get me, you, him or her, us, you or them. There's no other forms. So this is also a natural class of the accusative and dative, which correspond to the object forms in English. So object or the object of preposition. So object slash prep, I'll write that as object of preposition. That means like, I give it to him, or it is not like him to do that. So those are the natural classes that I think are pretty clear off here, and I think those are the only ones in this case. So let's ask ourselves if we could apply tests to look at this. And actually, we kind of did before. So we did do the test as we went through this. So we know that these are syncretic, and we can also find some natural classes here as well. So basically, all of the plural forms with singular you would form a natural class, and then the other ones would be on their own. So you have some practice questions you can do. We did number 6 in class. That was the, well, this example. So if you'd like to see a complete solution with written answers, please check the text. But I believe we covered it informally as we talked through it. If you have any questions, as always, you know where to get me. On your assignment, I should say, you will be doing something with syncretism, and you'll be doing it for singular they. So, you know, maybe reading the textbook to see how this was done and going over the slides might not be a bad way to review, but we'll see how you do it. So you know where to contact me if you have questions, and I'll see you next week.